Good evening, and welcome back, wherever you are right now. Whether you're lying in the dark with your phone resting against your chest, or sitting in a chair with the lamp still on, or somewhere in between those two things, that half place where sleep hasn't quite made its claim yet, I'm glad you're here. Drop a comment if you feel like it. Tell me where in the world you're listening from, what the weather is doing outside your window, whether the night is quiet or not. I read them. It matters more than you'd think. Tonight we are going back, further than usual. We are going back to the edge of everything, to the place before place, the time before time, when the only thing in existence was the potential for existence, and even that barely qualifies as a description. We are going to talk about Thor, not the one you think you know, not the red cape and the wisecracking and the retrofitted heroism. We are going to talk about the real one, the one who thundered through the dreams of people who lived and died thousands of years ago, who invoked his name when the sky split open, who carved his image into wood and stone and breathed prayers into the storm, because the storm was him, the one who was not a hero, but a force, the one who did not save the world once in a climactic battle, but saved it constantly, every night, in the dark, at the edge of the known, and kept saving it, and kept fighting, until the very last day. That is what this is about, not a character, a cosmos, and the terrifying weight of being the only thing standing between it and the end. Settle in. Close your eyes if you want to. Let me take you somewhere cold and old and alive. Before Thor, before Odin, before any of the names we know, there was nothing, and the nothing had a shape. Two realms. That is what the old texts tell us. And even that description undersells the strangeness of it. On one side, the north, a world called Niflheim, pure ice, pure cold, pure darkness, a void so complete it did not merely lack light, but actively consumed it, a silence so deep it was not the absence of sound, but the presence of something older than sound. 11 rivers poured from a spring in Niflheim called Hrungnir, and those rivers, the Elivaga they were called, the ice waves, flowed outward and downward into the gap between worlds, and as they traveled, they cooled and thickened and transformed. The water became rime, the rime became ice, layer upon layer, millennium upon millennium, the rivers built themselves into walls of frozen silence. On the other side, the south, a world called Muspelheim, pure fire, pure heat, a realm of such absolute and ferocious luminosity that nothing with a name or a will could survive at its edges. At the boundary of Muspelheim stood a figure called Surtur, sword in hand, a guardian so ancient he predates even the gods who would one day fear him. He was there at the start, he will be there at the end. The fire at his back makes the sun look like an afterthought. And between these two realms, Niflheim's ice and Muspelheim's fire, there was a gap. The Old Norse word is Ginnungagap. It does not translate cleanly, something like the yawning void, the gap that gapes, but even that misses it. The Ginnungagap was not empty in the way we understand emptiness. It was, and this is one of those moments where I have to confess that language is genuinely failing me. It was full of potential, not matter, not energy, not light, not heat, but the negative space shape of all those things, waiting. The ice came from the north, The sparks and embers drifted from the south, and where they met, in the deep middle of the gap, something happened that has no name because it happened before names. The ice dripped, and from the drips, from the slow melt at the collision point of everything cold and everything hot, there emerged a being, not born, not created, emerged, condensed from the interaction of opposing forces, the way dew condenses on cold metal in warm air, the way frost forms on a window that separates two temperatures. The being's name was Ymir, and Ymir was the first giant, the proto-giant, the Ur-giant, the one from whose body the entire world would eventually be carved. But we are not there yet. Ymir slept because there was nothing else to do, and while Ymir slept he sweated, and from his sweat came others, a male and a female from his left armpit, a son from his legs. The lines of descent were strange and stranger because they had to be. There was no one else to come from. These were the first frost giants, the Hrungnir, and they multiplied in whatever way giants multiply when the world is nothing but ice and fire and gap and the sound of something enormous dripping in the dark. The same process that made Ymir made something else. The dripping ice gave shape to a being called Odin, a cosmic cow, and Odin nourished Ymir with her milk, 4 rivers of it, flowing constantly, feeding the first and largest being in creation, while she herself fed on something more unusual. She licked the ice, and from the ice she licked free a shape, and the shape was a being, and the being was a god. His name was Buri. He was the first of the Aesir, the first ancestor, and he was not made but revealed, as if he had always been there inside the ice, waiting for the warmth that would uncover him. Buri had a son named Bor. Bor took a giant for a wife. This is the first of many such crossings. The gods and the giants entangled from the very beginning, enemies who are also family, opposites who cannot exist without each other. And her name was Bestla, daughter of the frost, and from Bor and Bestla came 3 sons, Odin, Vili, Ve, and here the story pivots, because the 3 brothers looked at Ymir, at the first being, the proto-giant who sweated giants, and whose existence predated their own, and they made a decision. What they felt looking at Ymir, we cannot know. The sources do not tell us. Some later scholars have called it fear, others necessity, others something colder than either. Whatever the reason, the 3 brothers killed Ymir. The killing was not clean. Nothing about what came after was clean. The blood that poured from Ymir's body was so vast it drowned almost all the frost giants. A great flood, the first flood, an extinction event before there was even a world to go extinct on. 2 survived, according to some versions. A giant named Bergelmir and his wife fled in a boat made of hollowed wood, and from them descended the giants who would persist through all the ages to come. The giants who would be Thor's enemies, the giants who would be standing at Ragnarok. But first, the world. From Ymir's flesh the brothers made the earth, the broad flat disk of Midgard, the middle realm, ringed with ocean. From his blood they made the seas and the lakes. From his bones they made the mountains. From his teeth and the splinters of his shattered bones they made the rocks and the stones and the shingle on every shore. From his skull they made the sky, and they set 4 dwarves at its 4 corners, Northri, Southri, Austri, Vestri, north and south and east and west, to hold it up, 4 small figures bearing the weight of everything above. From his brain they made the clouds, from his hair they made the trees, from his eyebrows. And this is one of those mythological details that is so specific and so strange that you feel certain someone, somewhere, saw something and built a myth around it. From his eyebrows, they made Midgard's protective wall, the boundary between the inhabited world and the wild places where the giants still roamed. They took sparks from Muspelheim and placed them in the sky to make stars. They took 2 sparks and made them into the sun and moon and placed them in chariots and set them racing across the sky pursued by wolves. Because nothing in this cosmology is allowed to be peaceful for long. Because even the daily rising of the sun is a chase scene, a narrow escape, a thing that could end. Then they made 2 humans, from an ash tree and an elm tree. Or, in some versions, they found 2 trees on the shore and breathed life into them. Odin gave breath and life. Vili gave wit and movement. Vi gave speech and senses. The first man was Asker, the ash. The first woman was Embla, the elm. And the world was populated, finally, and the 3 brothers stepped back. But this is not a creation myth that ends in rest. The Sabbath does not come. The world that has been made from a corpse carries within it the violence of its making, the unresolved grievance of the giants who lost their ancestor father, the deep structural instability of a cosmos built from blood and bone. Odin and his brothers made the world. They did not pacify it. That work fell to others. Odin became the All-Father, and All-Father is the right title because he was everywhere and nowhere, constantly moving, constantly scheming, giving up an eye for wisdom, and hanging himself on the world tree for the knowledge of the runes, trading his way to prophecy and back again, never still, never satisfied, always reaching for the next piece of information that might give him leverage over the fate he knew was coming. He built Asgard, the realm of the gods, and he populated it with the Aesir, and he set the Valkyries to ride across battlefields, collecting the honored dead, the Einherjar, who would train in Valhalla until they were needed, until the final battle. Because Odin knew, he had seen it, the Norns had shown him, or the well of Mimir had whispered it, or his ravens had brought him pieces of it, one at a time, until the picture assembled itself into something he could not unsee. The world would end. Ragnarok was coming. Surtur would come from the south with his sword that burns brighter than the sun, and Jörmungandr, the world serpent, would rise from the ocean, and Fenrir the wolf would slip his chains, and the gods would march out to meet them, and most of the gods would die. Odin had known this since near the beginning. He spent all the ages of the world preparing for a battle he knew he would lose. There is a word for what that is, but I keep not using it because none of them feel right. Tragic is too small. Heroic is technically accurate, but misses the texture. What Odin did was something stranger. He looked at the inevitability of his own destruction, and he chose not to prevent it. He understood it could not be prevented, but to make the fight worth having, to gather the dead, to train them, to go down fighting with a hall full of warriors at his back. This is the architecture of Norse consciousness, not the hope of winning, but the commitment to fighting well, the honor not in the outcome, but in the standing up. And into this cosmology, into this world of ice and fire and blood and looming doom, was born the being we call Thor. He was Odin's son, that much everyone agrees on, but the mother is where the versions diverge. Some say his mother was Jord, the earth itself, personified, the primordial feminine of the ground beneath every foot, the cold and fertile and ancient substance that predates civilization. This is the reading that makes Thor not merely a god, but a natural force, the son of sky and earth, the literal embodiment of the storm that connects the heavens to the land. Lightning, which is what Thor wielded, is literally what happens when the sky meets the earth, the charge differential between cloud and ground, discharging in a single catastrophic moment of contact. If you take that physics and personify it, you get something very close to what Thor was. Others say the mother was a giantess named Hlothin, which may itself be another name for Jord, or may not be. The sources are older than consistency, older than the impulse to reconcile contradictions, and they preserve the contradictions without apology. What is clear is this: Thor was not Odin's careful, scheming, chess-playing heir. He was something else entirely. From the moment of his birth, in whatever version of it you believe, he announced himself through force. The old sources describe him as the strongest of all the gods and all beings, and they do not mean this metaphorically. They mean it with the kind of literalness that a people surrounded by things larger and more powerful than themselves would understand. When the storm comes, when the world shakes, when the sky cracks open and the thunder rolls across the mountains and the rain comes down so hard you cannot see 10 feet in front of you, that is strength, real strength. Not the metaphorical strength of will or the political strength of position, but the raw kinetic fact of overwhelming force. He grew up in Asgard, and the stories about his childhood are thin, which is itself interesting. The mythological tradition was not much interested in Thor as a child, as if he emerged already formed, already enormous, already himself. The image we have of the young Thor is of something too large for the spaces around him, too powerful for the contexts he found himself in, straining against the ordinary scale of things. There is a story, possibly late, possibly embroidered, that his mother could not raise him in Asgard because he was already too strong, that he was fostered instead in another realm with beings more suited to matching his scale. Some sources say he was given to someone called Hrungnir and Hlora, who gave him a second name, Vingthor, and shaped him into what he became. What he became was this: the Thunderer, the one who rode across the sky in a chariot pulled by 2 goats, Tangrisnir and Tangnjoster, Teeth-Bara and Teeth-Grinder, their hooves striking the clouds with sounds that rolled across the 9 worlds as thunder. The wielder of Mjölnir, the hammer, the weapon whose making was itself a story of trickery and urgency and a near disaster that would have changed everything. The husband of Sif, whose golden hair was another story, another act of violation and consequence. The father of sons, Magni and Mothi, whose names meant strength and courage, as if the god had externalized his own defining qualities and given them bodies and futures. The protector of Midgard, the realm of humans, the one who spent his days not in the politics of Asgard, but out at the edges, in the wilderness, where the giants lived and plotted and tested the boundaries of the world's stability. Let me stay here a moment, because I think this is important, and I'm not sure the significance of it gets properly appreciated. The Norse cosmology is built on a constant, ongoing threat. The giants, the Jotnar, are not a defeated enemy. They are a persistent presence. They predate the gods. They are larger, in many cases, than the gods. They are the chaos against which order defines itself, and their relationship with order is not one of final suppression, but of constant, exhausting contest. Every generation, the gods must hold the line. Every season, the boundary must be maintained. There is no single victory that settles the matter. There is only the endless work of standing between the inhabited world and the forces that would reduce it back to ice and fire and blood. And that work, that specific, grinding, never finished work, is Thor's. Odin sits in his high seat and sees all things and sends his ravens and schemes across the long arcs of fate. Freya weeps gold tears and chooses the slain and practices satyr magic in her hall. Tyr holds his hand in the wolf's mouth to make the binding possible. Each god has their function, their specific competence, their place in the ecology of divine power. Thor's place is the threshold. Thor is what stands between the known world and the end of it, not in the grand eschatological sense of the final battle, that is Ragnarok, and even Thor cannot prevent that, but in the daily, practical, repeated sense of keeping the giants from simply walking in and taking what they want. He goes out, he comes back, he goes out again. The fights are not glamorous in the way that, say, Achilles fighting is glamorous. They are closer to maintenance. They are closer to the work that has to be done over and over, because the alternative is not death, but disorder, and disorder is worse than death. There is something modern about this, actually, and I notice that I'm almost saying something. So let me not quite say it. Let me let it hover. There is a way in which Thor is not a king or a priest or a prophet, but something more like a laborer, the most powerful being in existence, and what he does with that power is work. The making of Mjölnir deserves its own telling, because nothing about Thor can be understood without understanding the hammer, and nothing about the hammer can be understood without understanding the hammer, the circumstances of its creation, which were ridiculous and dire, and somehow both at once. Loki cut off Sif's hair. In the middle of the night, while she slept, Loki, the trickster, Odin's blood brother, the shapeshifter whose loyalties were always provisional, and whose humor had a cruelty underneath it that he never fully acknowledged, Loki cut off all of Sif's golden hair. Why? The sources do not fully agree. Mischief, some say. Cruelty pretending to be mischief, say others. The later sources imply a pattern. Loki did things because he could, because the doing of them felt like power, because the reaction, the outrage, the scramble, the consequence, was more interesting to him than the simple stability of things left alone. Thor's reaction was immediate and physical. He found Loki and he grabbed him and he made the situation extremely clear. You will fix this, or I will break every bone in your body, and I will take my time about it. Loki, who had been many things in his life, but never stupid, agreed. He went to Svartalfheim, the realm of the dwarves, specifically to a clan called the Sons of Ivaldi, who were known as the greatest craftsmen in all the 9 worlds. He commissioned from them 3 treasures: hair of actual gold that would grow as real hair grows, which he promised to Sif, a spear called Hrungnir, which never missed its mark, destined for Odin, and a ship called Skidbladnir, the finest ship ever made, which could sail any sea and be folded up small enough to fit in a pocket when not in use, which he intended for Freyr. He had 3 treasures. He could have gone home. He did not go home. Instead, Loki made a bet. He found 2 other dwarves, brothers named Sindri and Brokkr, and he wagered his own head that they could not make 3 gifts that surpassed what the Sons of Ivaldi had made. Brokkr agreed immediately. Sindri set to work at the forge. The first thing Sindri forged was a golden boar. He told Brokkr to work the bellows, to keep the air flowing to the fire without stopping, no matter what happened. Loki, watching and realizing he had perhaps made a poor bet, transformed himself into a fly and bit Brokkr on the hand. Brokkr did not stop. The golden boar emerged perfectly. The second thing Sindri forged was the arm ring Draupnir, which would drip 8 rings of equal weight every 9th night. A ring that made itself, that generated abundance from nothing. That was in some sense the purest possible expression of what a gift from a master craftsman could be. Loki bit Brokkr on the neck. This time, Brokkr did not stop. Draupnir emerged perfectly. The third thing Sindri forged was the hammer. He told Brokkr again, "Work the bellows, do not stop, no matter what happens." And this time, Loki bit Brokkr on the eyelid, hard enough to draw blood, hard enough that the blood ran into Brokkr's eye, and Brokkr stopped, just for a moment, just long enough to wipe the blood away, just long enough for the bellows to falter. The hammer emerged. It was perfect in every respect except one. The handle was too short. Brokkr brought the 3 treasures before the gods. They judged. The arm ring was magnificent. The boar was magnificent. The hammer, they said, with its short handle, was still the greatest of all the gifts, because what it did was what the world needed most. Mjölnir could shatter mountains. It could level anything. It could be thrown, and it would return to the hand that threw it, always, without fail. It could be made small enough to hide under a cloak. It was not decorative. It was not symbolic. It was functional in a way that bordered on the absolute, and its function was protection, and the protection it offered was not to individuals but to worlds. Loki lost the bet. Brokkr came to collect his head, and Loki, with an argument that was technically airtight and morally appalling, said, "Yes, you can have my head, but you cannot touch my neck, because the neck was not part of the wager." Brokkr could not behead him without touching the neck, so instead, Brokkr sewed Loki's lips shut with an awl and a length of sinew and walked away. The lips did not stay sewn. Nothing involving Loki stayed settled for long, but for a little while, the trickster was silent, and the hammer was in Thor's hands, and the world was fractionally safer than it had been before. Mjölnir, the name means crusher, or grinder, or something in that family, a word for the act of violent, overwhelming physical impact. Thor wore it hanging at his chest. He wore iron gloves to grip it, because even for him, the force of its return required reinforcement. He wore a belt called Mjölnir that doubled his already extraordinary strength. Armed this way, he was not merely a powerful being, he was a category of thing, a fact of physics wearing a face. He consecrated marriages with it, because the hammer's power was not only destructive, he raised the dead with it. The story of the goats, Hrungnir and Tangjosta, tells how he would kill and eat them for meals on long journeys, and then lay Mjölnir over their bones, and they would rise again, whole, alive, ready to pull the chariot again the next morning. He hallowed the boundaries of sacred things. He drove away the forces that threatened order, with a force that could not be argued with. The giants understood what the hammer meant. There are stories of them scheming to steal it, to neutralize it, to find some way to remove from the equation the one variable that kept the equation from resolving in their favor. And once, they succeeded. Thrym, a king of the frost giants, stole Mjölnir while Thor slept and buried it 8 miles beneath the earth. And then he sent a message. He would give it back in exchange for Freya as his bride. Freya, upon hearing this, was so furious that the walls of her hall shook. The answer was no. Definitively, architecturally, foundationally no. But the hammer was gone, and without the hammer, the giants would come, and the coming of the giants meant the walls of Asgard, the boundary between order and chaos, would not hold. Loki had an idea. Thor would dress as a bride. He would go to Thrym's hall in Freya's place, disguised, and retrieve the hammer. The accounts of what followed have a texture unlike almost anything else in Norse mythology. They are funny, in a specific way, the humor of something enormous and furious trying to fit into a box it was never meant for. Thor dressed in a bridal veil. He was enormous. He was furious. He was, in Loki's words, exactly who he appeared to be if you were paying any attention at all. Thrym, who had convinced himself that desire was the same as wisdom, was not paying attention. He sat Thor at the table and announced the wedding feast. He watched his supposed bride eat an entire ox and 8 salmon and 3 barrels of mead. When he tried to steal a kiss beneath the veil and met Thor's burning eyes, Loki told him it was bridal nerves, bridal hunger, 8 days of longing for this union. When Mjölnir was brought out to consecrate the marriage, because this was how Norse weddings were done, the hammer hallowing the bond, Thor grabbed it, and then he was exactly who he always was. The hall did not survive the reunion of Thor and Mjölnir. Thrym did not survive it. The guests did not survive it, and the hammer came home. I need to pause here and collect the thread, because we are deep in the middle of this thing, and I want to make sure we are holding the right pieces. Thor is, at this point in the telling, a protector, an enforcer, a force of divine maintenance. But there is another dimension to him that the mythology insists on, and it is this: the question of his limits. Thor is the strongest being in the 9 worlds, and he knows it, and the mythology is periodically interested in showing him that the category of strongest being in the 9 worlds does not mean what he thinks it means. He went to Utgard, the realm of the giants, but not the frost giants at the threshold, not Thrym and his kind who were powerful and reckless and ultimately manageable. Utgard was ruled by a king named Utgard-Loki, not the Loki of Asgard, a different being, a giant wearing a similar name like a borrowed coat, and Utgard-Loki was something Thor had rarely encountered, someone smarter than the situation he appeared to be in. Thor arrived with Loki and a pair of human servants, Thjalfi and Röskva, children of a farmer who had once eaten the marrow from Tangrisnir's bones and thereby lamed the goat, and announced, as Thor always announced himself, through the fact of his presence. Utgard-Loki received him with an equanimity that should have been a warning. He said, "Yes, you may compete in our games." He said, "I have heard you are the strongest, the fastest, the greatest drinker. Let us see." Loki competed first in an eating contest. He ate everything on his side of the table. His opponent ate the meat and the bones and the table itself and the trough they were eating from. Loki lost. Thjalfi ran a race against a young giant named Hugi. 3 times Thjalfi ran, and 3 times Hugi was already at the other end before Thjalfi reached the halfway point. Thjalfi lost. Thor lifted a drinking horn and was told he could empty it in 3 swallows. The first swallow barely lowered the level. The second swallow barely lowered the level. The third swallow, and Thor put everything into it. Everything. The full force of his capacity lowered the level a little. Thor tried to lift a cat from the floor. He could raise one paw only. Thor wrestled an old woman. The old woman slowly forced him to one knee, and Thor left Utgard in something he did not entirely recognize in himself, because it was rare, the feeling of having been inadequate, the feeling of the world being larger than he was. Utgard-Loki escorted them to the border of his realm, and then, at the border, told Thor the truth. The eating contest. Loki's opponent had been Wildfire itself. Nothing eats faster than fire. The race, Hugi was thought, and nothing is faster than thought. The drinking horn, its other end was in the ocean, and Thor had drunk so much that the ocean level had visibly dropped, and the tides still carry the mark of that swallowing. The cat was Jörmungand, the world serpent, the great snake that circles Midgard and holds its own tail in its mouth, and Thor had lifted one loop of it off the floor, and in doing so, had slightly unmade the boundary of the world. The old woman, she was old age herself, and nothing defeats old age. Thor raised Mjölnir. Utgard-Loki was already gone. The lesson is not that Thor is weak. The lesson is that the scale of the world exceeds individual power, even divine individual power. That there are contests in which the strongest hand cannot win because the opponent is not a person but a principle. Thor could beat any frost giant. He could beat any god. He could not beat time. He could not beat the ocean. He could not beat the fact that the world is larger than the strength of any single being, however extraordinary. He knew this. Afterward, he carried it, and he went on anyway, out to the edges, doing the maintenance work, because the knowing did not change the necessity. There is a woman in Jotunheim whose story often gets told in the margins of Thor's story, which means it almost gets lost. Her name is Skadi. She is a giantess, the daughter of Thjazi, a giant whom the gods killed, or allowed to be killed, which the myths treat as the same thing, and she came to Asgard with her weapons to demand compensation for her father's death. She arrived, armed and ready for war, and instead of war, she was offered negotiation, a husband from among the gods, chosen blind, choosing only by looking at their feet. She chose the most beautiful feet she could find, assuming they belonged to Balder the Bright. They belonged to Njord, the sea god. She married him. The marriage was difficult in the specific way that all marriages are difficult in these stories, which is to say it was impossible on structural grounds. She could not live at the sea, and he could not live in the mountains, and they separated, and she skied back to the peaks of Thrymheim and remained there, a huntress in the cold. She is relevant here because she is what Thor is not. Thor moves through the world as a hammer moves through wood, direct, complete, decisive, not subtle. Skadi is cold patience. She is the long wait, the careful aim, the arrow that lands after the quarry has forgotten it was being hunted. These are two models of power in Norse mythology, and they share a lineage, both giant-blooded, both violent, both at home in the harsh places, but they express that power in opposite ways. The myths rarely let us see them in the same room, maybe because putting them in the same room would force a confrontation the storytellers did not know how to resolve. Anyway, there is a giant named Hrungnir. He was the strongest of the frost giants, the strongest of us, they said, meaning the giants, and this was not an idle boast, but a fact that the cosmos took seriously, the kind of fact that changes what is possible for everyone in proximity to it. He had a head of stone and a heart of stone. Literally, not metaphorically, the myths are specific about this. His heart was described as three-cornered, hard, a fact of his anatomy that becomes a symbol but starts as plain description. He carried a whetstone. His shield was stone. He was, in some sense, the material world given hostile form, rock and weight, and the patience of geological time. He had gotten drunk in Asgard. This requires some explanation. Odin, in a particularly Odin-like maneuver, had challenged Hrungnir to a race on horseback, and they had raced all the way to the gates of Asgard, and somehow, in the way that things happen in mythological time, Hrungnir had ended up inside the gates, in Valhalla, at the table of the gods, drinking their mead and becoming increasingly expansive in his opinions. He said he would carry Valhalla back to Jotunheim. He said he would sink Asgard into the sea and carry Freya and Sif home as prizes. The gods sat and listened to this and were, variously, amused and furious and bored, and eventually someone called for Thor. Thor arrived and was immediately furious. He was always immediately furious. But Odin pointed out, with the particular irritating calm of someone who had planned all of this, that Hrungnir was a guest, that he had been invited, that killing a guest, even a guest who was making extremely specific threats about kidnapping members of the household, was not the done thing. The laws of hospitality, sacred, binding. So Thor agreed to a formal duel, a holmgang. They would meet at a place called Ginnungagap. The giants, to prepare for this, built a clay giant, an artificial being of enormous size, assembled from the earth itself, animated by the heart of a dead mare because they could not find anything better, and given Hrungnir's flank on the field. His name was Muspelheim, cloud calf, and he was so large that he urinated himself with fear when he saw Thor coming, which tells you something about the scale of what was approaching. Thor's servant Thjalfi ran ahead and told Hrungnir, "Thor is coming underground. He will attack from below." Hrungnir, who was enormous and made of stone and consequently not very mobile, stepped onto his shield to protect his feet. This meant he had nothing to stand behind. Thor came above ground, straight on, lightning in his blood and in his hands, and threw Mjölnir with everything. Hrungnir threw the whetstone. The whetstone and Mjölnir met in mid-air. The whetstone shattered, and pieces of it flew in all directions. One piece struck Thor in the forehead and lodged there, a fragment of stone in the skull of the god of thunder, and it stayed there. It stayed there for the rest of his life. Thor fell, but Mjölnir had not missed, and Hrungnir fell too. And when Hrungnir fell, he fell across Thor's neck, pinning him to the earth with the dead weight of the world's strongest giant. The gods could not move him. They tried and could not. In some versions, it took a third of the gods working together to fail. Then Thor's son Magni, a child, 3 years old, son of the giantess Jarnsaxa, walked up and lifted Hrungnir's leg, casually, without apparent effort, and Thor got up. He stood there with a whetstone in his forehead. He would carry it to Ragnarok. He gave Magni Hrungnir's horse as a reward, which irritated Odin because the horse was magnificent and Odin had wanted it, and Thor pointed out, without apparent concern for his father's feelings, that the horse went to the one who had earned it. The whetstone in Thor's head was never fully removed. A Volva, a prophetess named Groa, tried. She was singing incantations over his wound, and the stone was loosening, and then Thor, trying to repay her by telling her that her husband Orvandil was alive, and Thor had carried him out of the frozen north in a basket, and had broken off Orvandil's frost-bitten toe and thrown it into the sky, where it became a star. Thor's excitement at this news disrupted Groa's concentration, and the spell was lost, and the stone remained. It is one of the mythology's quietly devastating moments. Good intentions, ruined outcome. The stone stays. It always stays. There is a figure at the edge of all of Thor's stories, appearing and disappearing, never quite gone, who requires sustained attention: Loki. Loki is not Thor's enemy. This is important to understand. He is not, at this point in the mythology, the villain he will become. He is something harder to categorize. Thor's companion on journeys that should probably not be taken, the intelligence to Thor's strength, the chaos variable that makes the outcome of any situation genuinely unclear. They travel together repeatedly. They get into trouble together repeatedly. Loki creates the problem, and Thor solves the problem with violence, and the interaction between those two modes of operating is what the adventure stories of the Eddas are made of. But Loki is also the father of Fenrir, the wolf who will swallow Odin at Ragnarok. He is the father of Jörmungandr, the world serpent, the creature that Thor will kill and then walk 9 paces and then die from the venom of. He is the father of Hel, who rules the realm of the dead. He is the father of Sleipnir, Odin's 8-legged horse, and the mother, actually, which is its own story involving shape-shifting and a stallion and a construction project that was almost ruined. A story so strange that even by the standards of Norse mythology, it takes a moment to metabolize. The relationship between Loki and Thor is the relationship between two forces that need each other, even as they damage each other. Thor's directness needs Loki's cleverness to navigate a world that is not simply a problem of force. Loki's cleverness needs Thor's directness to impose consequences on a world that can absorb cleverness indefinitely but cannot absorb Mjölnir. That relationship would not survive the death of Balder. But that is a story for another night, a story about light and loss and the specific kind of grief that precedes the end of the world, and I won't walk into it here because it deserves its own dark. What I will say is that Loki's unraveling, his transformation from trickster to active agent of destruction, the shift from chaos as spice to chaos as poison, is the thing that makes Ragnarok inevitable. Or rather, it is the thing that makes Ragnarok imminent. Ragnarok was always inevitable. Loki merely hurried it along, in the specific way that someone who cannot stop themselves from pulling at a loose thread hurries the unraveling of a garment. Let me dwell for a moment, I think this matters, on what the Norse understood about time. They did not understand it the way we do. We exist, most of us, in a framework where time moves forward and progress is at least theoretically possible, where things can, in principle, get better, where the future is open. The Norse framework was different. Time moved forward, yes, but it moved forward toward a known destination. Ragnarok was not a possibility. It was a fact in the future, which is a different category of fact than a fact in the past, but a fact nonetheless. The gods knew it, the skalds knew it, the people who told these stories and listened to these stories in the long dark winters knew it. And yet they kept going. The gods kept fighting. Thor kept going out to the edges and hitting giants with Mjölnir. Odin kept collecting the dead for a battle he knew would be lost. The tree Yggdrasil kept growing, its branches reaching through all 9 worlds, its roots gnawed by the serpent Niflheim at the bottom of the well, and it was dying. It was always slowly dying, and it kept growing anyway. There is something in this that I find very hard to articulate without either romanticizing it or academizing it into abstraction. It is a worldview that takes the worst possible fact, the fact of ending, the fact of loss, the fact that everything you love will eventually be destroyed, and asks, given that, what do you do? And the answer it gives is you fight. You protect what you can for as long as you can. You do your work. You go out to the edges and you come back and you go out again. You do not pretend the ending is not coming. You look at it clearly and you pick up your hammer and you go. This is not, I want to be clear, a nihilistic worldview. Nihilism says, if it ends, nothing matters. The Norse cosmos says, if it ends, it matters now. The meaning is not in the permanence. The meaning is in the doing. Thor understood this in his body before he understood it in his mind. He was the hammer. He was the going out and the coming back. He was the work itself. There is a journey called the Hymir's Cauldron story, which is ostensibly about Thor going to get a brewing vessel large enough for the gods to hold their feast in, but which is actually about Thor and the sea. He went to Ymir, a giant who lived at the edge of the ocean, who fished with hooks the size of anchors and caught whales for breakfast. Thor went with Tyr, whose mother lived with Ymir in that cold place. He ate 2 of Hymir's oxen for dinner, and Ymir was not delighted about this, but said nothing yet. The next morning, Ymir suggested they go fishing. Thor took one of Hymir's remaining oxen, cut off its head, and used it as bait. He rowed, and here the sources are specific, and the specificity matters. He rowed past the point where Ymir said it was safe to fish, past the boundary, past the edge of the known water, and into the sea that lies beyond the world's rim. He rowed until he was above Jörmungandr. He dropped his line. The world serpent took the bait, and Thor pulled. What happened next is described in the Eddas with a physicality that is almost unbearable. Thor pulled, and the serpent pulled back, and the force of it pulled Thor's feet through the bottom of the boat, and he stood on the seafloor, bracing against the bed of the ocean, pulling against the world serpent with everything he was. Jörmungandr came up out of the water. It came up, and it looked at him. It was enormous, in the way that things are enormous, when the word enormous has stopped meaning anything, and the reality has broken through language. It was the border of the world. It was the thing that keeps the ocean in, and it came up out of the water, and it looked at Thor with its eyes full of poison and its jaw full of hooks, and they looked at each other across a very small distance. This is their first meeting. They will meet again at Ragnarok. They will kill each other. Ymir cut the line. He cut it because he was afraid, justifiably, because if Thor had held on any longer and pulled Jörmungandr fully out of the ocean, the world itself would have come apart at the seams. The boundary would have failed. The chaos would have come in from all directions. Ymir cut the line, and the serpent sank back, and the ocean closed over it, and Thor threw Ymir overboard and waded ashore, and he did not have the cauldron yet, but he went and got it, and the story ends with the feast being held and the gods drinking their mead. What the story holds is Thor and the serpent, the eye contact across the narrow water, the recognition in both of them, because Jörmungandr is an intelligent being, whatever else it is, that this is not the final meeting, that the final meeting is coming, that they are bound to each other. In the most absolute way, two things can be bound, as each other's ending. Thor knew. He went back and had mead with his family. Let me say something about the gods who share the sky with Thor, because they illuminate him by difference. Odin is cunning. Odin is the god of death, but he is also the god of poetry and wisdom and war strategy, and he practices a form of magic called seidr that was considered unmasculine by Norse standards. Odin sat and spun fates, and the Norse found this disquieting, and the fact that the All-Father did it anyway tells you something about how willing he was to be misunderstood in the service of power. Odin knows the runes, which are not letters but forces, the shapes of how things are, carved into the cosmos before language existed. He sacrificed himself to himself on Yggdrasil to obtain them. He hung for 9 nights, wounded by a spear, and at the end of the 9th night, the runes revealed themselves to him. Odin is the god who will die at Ragnarok, swallowed by Fenrir, and his death is prepared for but cannot be prevented. His son Vidar will avenge him, tearing the wolf's jaw apart or stabbing it through the palate, depending on which version you read. The line of Odin does not end, but Odin ends. Baldur is the bright god, Odin's most beloved son, the one of whom it was said that he was so beautiful light reflected from him. He began to have dreams of his own death, and Odin rode to the underworld to wake a dead Völva and ask her what the dreams meant, and she told him. Frigg, Balder's mother, went to everything in the world, every plant and animal and stone and disease and fire and water, and asked each one to swear not to harm Balder. Everything swore, almost everything. Mistletoe was too young to swear, or too small, or too overlooked. The versions disagree, but they agree on this: Frigg did not ask it. Loki found out. And at the game the gods were playing, throwing things at Balder to watch them bounce off harmlessly, which was their entertainment, because Balder was invulnerable now, because the oath protected him. At this game, Loki took the blind god Hrungnir by the arm and guided his hand to throw a dart of mistletoe, and Balder fell, and the light went out of Asgard. Thor was not in Asgard when Balder died. In some tellings, this is incidental. In others, it feels like an absence the world conspired to create, as if keeping Thor away was a necessary precondition for the thing to happen, as if Loki knew that with Thor present, it would have been stopped. Whether or not that is true, it is a thing to sit with. The protector was not there, and the unprotected thing died. The grief that followed Balder's death is the best documented grief in Norse mythology. Frigg asked for a volunteer to ride to Hel and ask for Balder back. A god named Hermóður went on Sleipnir and rode for 9 nights through dark valleys, so deep and cold they make the regular dark look comfortable. And he came to the doors of Hel's hall, and he went inside, and he found Balder sitting at the high seat, and he asked. Hel said, "I will release him if everything in the world weeps for him. Everything in the world, not most things, everything. If a single thing refuses, or fails, or is missed, Balder stays." The gods sent messengers through all the worlds to ask for tears. Everything wept. The trees wept. The stones wept. The animals wept. And then the messengers found a giantess sitting in a cave, a giantess named Thok, which means thanks. And Thok said, "I never got anything from Balder that I valued. Let him stay where he is. Hel can keep what she has." Thok was Loki. They knew it then, or guessed it, or confirmed it later. And Balder stayed in the realm of the dead, where he waited. After that, Loki's unraveling was fast. He came to a feast and said things he could not take back. A poem called the Lokasenna records it, and the poem is essentially Loki walking through the room and destroying every relationship he had ever had, accusing and revealing and mocking until even Sif, the wife of Thor, was targeted, and Thor arrived and threatened to drive Mjölnir through Loki's skull, and Loki left. He left and transformed himself into a salmon and hid in a waterfall and was caught, and the gods bound him to 3 rocks with the entrails of his own son, and a serpent dripped venom on his face, and his wife Sigyn held a bowl to catch the drops, and when she emptied the bowl, the drops fell, and the convulsions of Loki's agony shook the earth. And that is what earthquakes are in this mythology. That is what an earthquake is. He is still there, bound, waiting, until the moment when the bonds break and Ragnarok begins. Ragnarok, the doom of the gods. Some translate it as twilight, which is evocative but not quite right. Others say Ragnar means the ruling powers, the gods, and Rök means fate, or origin, or end. The meanings blur because at sufficient scale, origin and end are the same word said from different directions. The doom of the powers, the fate of the gods. It will begin with Fimbulwinter. 3 winters without summer. 3 years of cold and darkness and famine and war. Brothers will kill brothers. The bonds of family will dissolve. The world will become what it has always threatened to become. Fenrir will slip his chain, the chain called Gleipnir, made by the dwarves from impossible ingredients. The sound of a cat's footstep, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, the spittle of a bird. 6 things that do not exist, woven into something so light and soft it looks like silk ribbon, a chain that could not be broken because the things that made it could not be reasoned with. Fenrir had submitted to the binding only because Tyr had placed his hand in the wolf's mouth as a pledge of good faith, and when the chain held and Fenrir tried to break free and couldn't, Fenrir bit off Tyr's hand, and Tyr stood there with the bleeding stump and did not flinch because the sacrifice was necessary and Tyr was the god of justice and he had weighed the exchange and accepted it. The serpent will rise, the wolf will run, with jaws that reach from earth to sky. Naglfar, the ship made from the fingernails and toenails of the dead. The reason, in the old traditions, for trimming the nails of a corpse before burial, so that the ship would take longer to complete. Naglfar will sail with an army of giants, and the dead who are not the honored dead, the uncollected ones, the ones who died of illness or age or accident rather than battle. Loki will be the helmsman. Surtur will come from the south with fire. Heimdall, the watchman of the gods, will blow Gjallarhorn, the horn whose sound reaches every corner of the 9 worlds, and the Einherjar will pour out of Valhalla all the warriors, all the dead who died with honor, all the years of careful collection coming to its purpose, and the gods will march out to meet what is coming. Odin will face Fenrir, the wolf will swallow him, Vidar will avenge him, Freyr will face Surtur, but Freyr gave away his sword, his magic sword that fights of its own accord, gave it to a servant as the price of winning a giantess's love, and he will face the Fire Lord with an antler, and he will fall. Tyr will fight Garm, the hound of hell, and they will kill each other. Loki and Heimdall will face each other, these 2 who have always been set against each other in obscure ways, these 2 who some scholars think were once something more like twins than opposites, and they will kill each other. And Thor will face Jörmungand, the 3rd meeting, the last meeting. He will kill the serpent. He will plant Mjölnir in its skull, and the serpent will die, and Thor will stand. And then he will take 9 steps backward and fall from the poison that has saturated the air around the dying serpent, the venom that Thor could not help but breathe in, and he will die after 9 steps. 9. The number of nights Odin hung on Yggdrasil, the number of worlds. 9 is the mythological number of completion, of the thing taken to its full extent, of the journey done. Thor will take 9 steps. Surtur will spread fire across the world. The earth will sink into the ocean. The sky will be dark. And then, and this is the thing that separates Norse mythology from despair, the small but unkillable thing, the earth will rise again, green, from the water. The few survivors will meet on the field of Idavul, where Asgard once stood, and they will find the golden game pieces in the grass, the pieces from a game the gods used to play, from before, scattered in the earth and preserved somehow through the fire and the flood. The sons of Thor, Magni and Mothi, will inherit Mjölnir. Vidar and Vali will survive. Balder will return from the realm of the dead, because the bonds of hell will dissolve with the rest of the world's structure, and what was bound will be released. A new world, built on the ruins of the old. The pattern of world-making from Ymir repeating, distantly, at a different scale. The thunder does not end. It transforms. The fragment of whetstone in Thor's skull. I keep coming back to it, and I'm not entirely sure why, except that it feels like the most honest detail in the entire mythology. Not the hammer, which is a symbol, or the belt, which is equipment, or the gloves, which are technical necessity. The stone in his head, the shard of a weapon thrown by an enemy that lodged there and could not be fully removed, that he carried through every subsequent fight and journey, and feast and sleep, that was there when he went fishing above the world serpent, and there when he stood in Hymir's boat, and there when he waded ashore, and there when he sat with his family and drank mead. What do you do with an injury that cannot be healed? What do you do with the fact that you were hurt, that the hurt is permanent, that it is now part of the structure of you? The mythology's answer is not to dramatize it. It is to note it and continue. The stone is there. He picks up Mjölnir. He goes out. There is a version of strength that is about the absence of damage. Clean, whole, unimpaired, capable of performing at maximum efficiency. This is the version of strength that advertising sells and that fantasy often depicts. The hero who takes wounds dramatically and heals them dramatically and emerges from each trial stronger and more complete. There is another version, which is about what you do with the damage that does not heal. The stone in the skull, the missing hand, the eye given away, the cost that cannot be refunded. The Norse gods are built on this second version. Every one of them is paying for something. Every one of them carries the accounting of choices made in circumstances they could not fully control. And they go on anyway, not because they are above consequence, but because they have internalized consequence so completely that it no longer requires special processing. They carry their wounds the way a tree carries its rings, invisibly, structurally, as part of what they are. I think this is part of why these stories survived. Not because they are comforting. They are not comforting. They are cold, and their endings are bad, and the best you can hope for is to die fighting, rather than to not die. But they are honest, in a way that few mythological traditions sustain, across so many stories and so many centuries. They look at the fact of suffering, and they do not dress it in meaning that was not there. They say, it hurts, it will keep hurting, it cannot be fixed, and here is what you do with that. You go out, you come back, you go out again. Anyway, the thing that happened to Thor in the centuries after the Norse world was converted to Christianity is interesting in a way I find difficult to name exactly. The gods did not vanish. They went somewhere else. They became, and here is the wobbly metaphor I warned you was coming. I can't find a better one. It's like trying to describe the smell of a color. They became the bones of something else, not the flesh, which was replaced. The names changed, the rituals transformed, the cosmology overwritten, but the bones underneath, The structural assumption, the sense that thunder is a person, that weather is not random but intentional, that the gods of this world are powerful and present and engaged with the day-to-day maintenance of existence rather than remote and abstract. The Vikings who sailed west and north carried Thor with them. They found Iceland and Greenland, and eventually the coast of North America, and they named things after him. Thorsmork, the forest of Thor, in Iceland, where the glacier meltwater runs between the mountains and the ash trees grow, and the air has that quality of places that have never been fully domesticated. Thorshavn, in the Faroe Islands, Thor's harbor, which is still its name today, an everyday word in an everyday place, a container ship arriving in the harbor without anyone on board necessarily thinking about the god whose name they just passed through. Thorsdagur, the day of Thor, folded into the 7-day week without ceremony, without annotation, a residue of the old world in the infrastructure of the new. The storm has a name. The storm has always had a name. We just don't always say it out loud anymore. The scholarly question of whether Thor was one god in one tradition or a confederation of similar thunder deities synthesized by proximity and narrative convenience is genuinely interesting and genuinely unresolvable, because the evidence cuts both ways, and the truth is probably messy in the way that all human inventions are messy, assembled over time, by many hands, with different intentions, the seams not always visible, but present if you look. What we have is the result of many centuries of telling, many voices, many contexts, the stories shaped and reshaped by the cultures that needed them. What did they need from Thor? Protection, obviously, primarily. In a world without the infrastructure of modern safety, without the institutions and technologies that separate us from the weather, from violence, from the random damage of a world that does not have our welfare as a design priority, you pray to what protects you. You invoke the name of the power that stands between you and the thing that wants to destroy you. Thor's name was on amulets and weapons, and the posts of doorways, and the prows of ships. He was invoked at weddings, and at the planting of fields, and at the birth of children. He was the name spoken when the sky darkened and the thunder began, the name that was perhaps a prayer, and perhaps an acknowledgement, and perhaps simply a recognition. You are there. We know you are there. But there was something else, I think, underneath the protection, some kind of comfort in the image of the god who is strongest and still has a stone in his head, some kind of relief in the permission to be powerful and damaged at the same time, to not have to choose between the two, to not have to heal yourself before you are allowed to do your work. Thor did not wait to be fixed. He went. The stone and Mjölnir both went with him, and he carried both, and the sky cracked open. I have been trying to articulate what the myth of Thor is actually about, not what it depicts, but what it is doing, and I keep coming back to the same thing. It is about the relationship between strength and endurance, not endurance as patience, as waiting, as outlasting, endurance as the quality of continuing to do a thing under conditions that make the thing harder, the ongoing nature of the work, the knowing that it will need to be done again tomorrow and the day after, and in every age until the last age, and doing it today anyway. Ragnarok will come. It has always been coming. The The serpent is below the water, and the wolf is on his chain, and the fire waits in the south. This is known. It was known from the beginning. It does not change the requirement. The threshold still needs defending. The giants still come. The hammer still needs to be lifted. There is a culture, somewhere in the back of all the stories we tell ourselves, that chooses this as its central myth. Not the triumph, not the resurrection, not the paradise regained, or the hero returned, or the light that defeats the darkness once and forever. The fight, known to be lost, fought to its finish, cleanly, with force, by the strongest hand that has ever existed. I don't know what to do with that, exactly. I've been sitting with it for a while, and I'm not sure I've found the bottom of it, but I think it's something. The world will end. The thunder will still come first. The myths live on, in the same way that rivers live on after the mountains that made them have eroded away. The original shape is gone, but the water still runs, still finds the path it was carved into 10,000 years ago, still ends up in the sea. You can read the prose Edda in a coffee shop in Oslo and feel the cold coming off the words. You can hear the thunder somewhere in northern Europe in November and understand, in the older part of yourself, why someone once said a name when they heard it. Some things persist not because they are institutionally protected, but because they describe something true. The Norse myths describe the following things as true. The world is beautiful, and the world is hostile, and these are not contradictions. Strength does not protect you from cost. The ending is known, and the work is still required. The being who stands at the boundary and does the maintaining and the protecting and the fighting and the coming home is not a king or a priest or a philosopher, but something humbler and more essential, the one who goes out. Thor is not dead. He is in the storm. He is in the part of you that lifts the thing you do not feel capable of lifting. He is in the stone in your head that won't come out, and in the hammer in your hand that you picked up anyway. He is in the moment, before the first step of the 9. He is in the going. Good night, wherever you are, whatever the weather is doing outside. I hope the night is kind to you. I hope the dark is the soft kind. I hope the thunder, if it comes, sounds less like a warning and more like what it is, the voice of something ancient and strong, passing overhead, going about its work, the same work it has always done, the same work it will always do, until the last day, which has not yet come. Sleep well. I'll see you next time.